In peaceful Willow Creek, two fake HOA officers knocked on Martin Hayes' door after sunset. Their false accusations masked something sinister, turning a quiet evening into a tense standoff, fueled by fear, intimidation, and courage. If this moment felt intense, prepare yourself, because what comes next is darker, more dangerous, and far more powerful than anything you've seen so far. The quiet suburb of Willow Creek had always been a sanctuary for Martin Reed. After retiring from decades of teaching, he enjoyed nothing more than the rhythm of peaceful evenings, watering the small garden in his front yard, reading on his porch and watching the sun slowly dip behind the rows of tidy homes. The neighborhood was known for its silence, a kind of calm that felt unbreakable. But on one particular evening, just as the last shades of orange disappeared from the horizon, the unthinkable happened. A loud, thunderous knock rattled Martin's front door. It wasn't the polite tap of a neighbor or the familiar ring of a delivery man. This knock carried force, urgency, and a strange aggression that sent a chill down Martin's spine. Startled, Martin set aside his book and stood in the dimly lit living room, staring at the door as though it had spoken to him. His instincts screamed caution, but years of living in a safe community made him push those thoughts aside. He unlocked the door and pulled it open. What he saw instantly unsettled him. Two men stood on the porch, their faces half hidden beneath the shadows of their black baseball caps. Both wore dark jackets with crooked patches sewn onto the chest, patches that resembled official badges but lacked the clarity of anything legitimate. The taller of the two, with sharp cheekbones and a cold stare, stepped forward before Martin could even greet them. "Mr. Reed," the man announced flatly, "we're here on behalf of the Homeowners Association. There have been multiple complaints against your property." Martin blinked in disbelief. "Complaints?" he echoed. His voice trembled slightly, not from guilt, but from confusion. In all his years of living in Willow Creek, Martin had never once received a warning or a notice from the HOA. His lawn was well kept, his fence perfectly aligned, and he rarely played his television louder than a whisper. "Yes," the shorter man chimed in, his tone sharper and more menacing. "Your fence is taller than permitted, and there have been noise disturbances reported. We've warned you before." Martin's brows furrowed. His mind searched for logic, but none could be found. He knew these claims were false, fabricated even. And yet, here were these two men standing at his door, trying to cloak their threats in the language of authority. The crooked patches, the unprofessional tone, and the timing of their visit, all of it screamed wrong. Still, a knot of fear tightened in his chest. "I haven't received any letters, any notices, nothing official," Martin said firmly, trying to steady his voice. "The HOA doesn't operate this way. You can't just—" The taller man cut him off, leaning closer, his shadow stretching across Martin's doorway. "You can make this easy, Mr. Reed, or you can make it hard." At that moment, Martin's heart began to pound. The peaceful rhythm of his retirement life cracked open, replaced by something dark and unfamiliar. He realized he wasn't facing HOA representatives at all. He was staring into the eyes of men who carried no true authority, men who had come with an agenda he didn't yet understand. And as the silence stretched between them, Martin had the unsettling sense that this knock on his door was not just about false complaints. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Martin Reed kept his hand on the doorknob, gripping it so tightly that his knuckles turned pale. The two men did not move away. They loomed in the faint glow of the porch light, their shadows swallowing the welcome mat beneath their boots. The taller one, who seemed to have taken the lead, shifted his weight forward, his voice steady but tinged with a strange sharpness that made Martin uneasy. "We don't have to waste time with paperwork," the man said, his tone dismissive. "We've already had too many complaints. If you want to avoid further problems, you'll comply." The words struck Martin like a hammer. Paperwork was the one thing any legitimate HOA relied upon. Letters, warnings, and copies of regulations were part of the process. But these men had none of it. Their insistence on skipping formality didn't just feel wrong, it screamed illegitimacy. Martin's mind raced. He tried to remain composed, but inside he felt as though he was standing on the edge of something he couldn't fully see. The shorter man, whose eyes darted nervously back and forth as if checking the street for witnesses, added with a sharp edge, "Your fence is a violation." "Mr. Reed, and the noise? People are tired of it. They've had enough." Martin almost laughed at the absurdity but restrained himself. He hadn't hosted a gathering in years, and the only sound escaping his home was the faint hum of the classical records he played in the evenings. There was no noise problem, no reason for neighbors to complain. And his fence? It was built by a licensed contractor, inspected and approved when he moved in. Their accusations held no ground. But the way they spoke, as if trying to corner him into submission, made him realize that truth wasn't their goal. Intimidation was. "I've lived here for over a decade," Martin said, his voice firmer now, though the tremor of fear still lingered. "If there were complaints, I would have received notice. The HOA doesn't show up on doorsteps at night. Not like this." For a moment, the taller man's jaw tightened and a flicker of irritation crossed his face. "Listen carefully," he said, lowering his voice until it was almost a growl. "We're giving you a chance to avoid consequences. Refuse, and you'll regret it." Martin's breath caught in his throat. Consequences. Regret. These weren't words of concerned neighbors or responsible officials. These were threats, plain and deliberate. He realized then that the men weren't here to uphold community standards. They were here to scare him, maybe even to push him into something much darker. His instincts told him to slam the door, lock it, and call the police. But another voice whispered that doing so might escalate things further. These men radiated menace, and their refusal to back down made Martin fear what they were capable of if provoked. The silence of Willow Creek now felt heavy, almost suffocating. Every rustle of leaves, every flicker of the porch light seemed amplified. Martin felt trapped, caught in a game he hadn't agreed to play, with rules he didn't understand. And just as the tension reached its breaking point, the sound of tires crunching on the driveway shattered the moment. A car pulled in, its headlights sweeping across the men's dark jackets. Relief surged through Martin as he recognized the vehicle. His son, Adam Reed, had come home. The crunch of tires against the gravel driveway felt like salvation. Martin's chest tightened with relief as the headlights of his son's car lit up the tense standoff on the porch. The two strangers instinctively shifted, their postures stiffening as though the beam of light had momentarily stripped away their false authority. Martin clung to the doorknob, his eyes locked on the car door as it opened, revealing a figure that filled him with both pride and reassurance. Adam Reed. Adam had returned home only days earlier from his latest military deployment overseas. His presence in the house had already begun to restore a sense of security for Martin, but tonight it meant far more. Dressed casually in jeans and a jacket, Adam carried himself with the same quiet authority that years of service had instilled in him. His steps were steady, measured, and filled with the kind of confidence that made people pause before underestimating him. "What's going on here?" Adam's voice rang out, calm but commanding, as he walked toward the porch. The taller man straightened his shoulders, attempting to maintain control of the situation. "This doesn't concern you," he said flatly. "We're here on official HOA business." Adam's brow furrowed, his sharp eyes scanning the crooked badges, the lack of identification, and the way the men positioned themselves as if guarding territory rather than resolving a complaint. He stopped next to his father, placing a reassuring hand on Martin's shoulder before turning his attention back to the so-called officials. "Official business?" Adam repeated, his tone skeptical. "Funny. Because I've lived here long enough to know the HOA doesn't send people banging on doors at night, especially not without documentation." The shorter man shifted uneasily, his eyes flickering toward the street where neighbors' curtains had begun to twitch. Adam had noticed it too. Shadows moving in windows, signs that people were aware something unusual was unfolding. "Look," the taller man said, his voice dropping lower as if trying to reclaim control. "Your father's been violating regulations. Fence issues, noise complaints. We're here to handle it quietly before things get worse." Adam's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, closing the space between himself and the imposters. The porch light caught the hard lines of his face, and for the first time the two men seemed less certain. "If you want to talk about violations, you'll need to show proof. Letters, documentation." Anything official? Adam said firmly. Otherwise, this conversation is over. There was no anger in Adam's voice, only a steady, unshakable calm that carried far more weight than shouting ever could. His military training had taught him that confidence unnerved aggressors more than threats, and sure enough, the taller man's confident mask began to crack. Martin, standing beside his son, felt a wave of pride and safety wash over him. The fear that had threatened to paralyze him only moments before began to recede. With Adam at his side, he no longer felt cornered. The impostors exchanged a quick glance, their silence betraying their uncertainty. Adam had shifted the balance of power without raising his voice or breaking a sweat. And yet Martin couldn't shake the feeling that this confrontation was far from over. Something darker lingered in the air, an unspoken promise that the night was about to escalate. Adam Reed stood tall beside his father, his calm composure masking the sharp calculations running through his mind. Every detail about the two men screamed inconsistency. Their jackets were worn and mismatched, their so-called HOA patches tilted at odd angles, as though stitched on hastily. Even their shoes were scuffed work boots, not the professional attire one would expect from officials representing a homeowners association. To Adam, it was obvious. These men were imposters. But to unmask them fully, he needed to push them until their story collapsed. "All right," Adam said, folding his arms across his chest, his tone steady. "If you're really with the HOA, let's see some credentials, identification, a letter, an official notice, anything." His eyes locked on the taller man who had been doing most of the talking. Real HOA representatives don't just show up in the dark with vague accusations. They follow the procedure, so prove me wrong. The taller man's lips pressed into a thin line. He glanced at his partner, who shifted uncomfortably under Adam's unwavering gaze. "We don't have to prove anything to you," the man finally muttered. "We've given your father his warning. He knows what needs to be done." Martin's chest tightened, but Adam stepped in before fear could take root again. "No," he said firmly. "What you've given him is a lie. If there were complaints, he would have received letters weeks ago. That's how it works, and you know it." The shorter man's hands fidgeted near his pockets, his voice rising. "You think you know everything because you've served in the military? This isn't the battlefield. This is a community, and there are rules." Adam tilted his head, his calmness cutting sharper than any raised voice. "I don't need to be on a battlefield to recognize intimidation tactics. And that's exactly what this is." His eyes flicked between the two men, catching the flicker of unease spreading across their faces. "You're not here to enforce rules. You're here to scare an old man who lives alone. Only tonight, you picked the wrong house." For the first time, Martin saw the men falter. The taller one's facade of confidence cracked, if only slightly. He shifted his weight, his jaw tightening as though struggling to hold the act together. Adam took a step forward, closing the distance between them. His presence was unyielding, his voice low but steady. "I'll ask one more time. Show proof. A letter, a badge, anything official. Otherwise, I'll assume you're trespassers and treat you as such." The porch fell into a tense silence, broken only by the faint hum of crickets in the distance. The impostors exchanged a nervous glance. Their authority had been stripped bare, their masks crumbling under Adam's relentless scrutiny. For the first time since the knock on the door, Martin felt the tide shifting. But just as relief began to seep into his chest, the taller man leaned in, his voice laced with venom. "You don't know who you're dealing with." And in that moment, Martin realized the real danger had only just begun. The air on the porch thickened, heavy with the weight of unspoken threats. Adam Reed stood firm, but he could feel the shift. The impostors weren't retreating. They were doubling down. The taller man straightened his jacket as if to restore some semblance of authority, while the shorter one clenched his fists, his restless movements betraying a nervous edge that bordered on dangerous. "You think this is a game?" The taller man hissed, his voice low and venomous. "If your father doesn't cooperate, there will be consequences, fines, legal action. You'll lose more than just your fence." Martin flinched at the word lose, the fear of vulnerability pressing down on him again. But Adam placed a steady hand on his father's shoulder, grounding him. He didn't take his eyes off the men. "Legal action?" Adam said, his tone steady, almost mocking. "Funny. Legal action requires documents, lawyers, and judges, none of which you have. What you do have are empty threats." The shorter man stepped closer, invading the porch light fully now. His face was lined with irritation, his voice a sharp bark. "Don't test us. People like you, people who think they're above the rules, they always pay the price." Adam's eyes narrowed. "No," he replied, his voice unwavering. "People like you who prey on the elderly, who use fear instead of facts. They're the ones who pay." His words sliced through the night like a blade, calm but lethal. Martin could see it clearly now. The facade of authority had cracked completely. What remained were two men cornered by their own lies, growing more reckless as their control slipped away. The taller man's jaw tightened, his eyes darting to the street where faint silhouettes lingered behind curtains. Neighbors were watching. And that meant witnesses. The imposters sensed it too. Their voices grew harsher, more desperate. "You think your neighbors will save you?" The taller one snapped. "When this escalates, no one will stand with you." Adam took a step forward, forcing them both a step back. His presence alone carried an unshakable weight, as though every inch of his posture told them he wasn't a man to be trifled with. "Escalate it then," he said coldly. "But know this, I won't back down. Neither will my father. And neither will this community." The words hung in the air, heavy, immovable. The porch light flickered once, as if nature itself punctuated his declaration. For a brief moment, silence reigned. The imposters exchanged another glance, their earlier bravado slipping into something uglier, frustration, even panic. Martin could see the sweat glistening on the shorter man's forehead, the twitch in his jaw. They were running out of options, and cornered predators were always the most dangerous. The taller man leaned in one last time, his voice a chilling whisper. "You'll regret this, both of you. We don't walk away empty-handed." Martin's pulse raced. He could sense that the night was spiraling into something far darker than he'd imagined. This wasn't about fences or noise complaints anymore. It was about intimidation, power, and the shadows lurking behind these men's lies. And as the tension crept higher, Martin realized this confrontation wasn't reaching its end. It was only just beginning. The threat still hung in the air when the sound of a door creaking open broke the silence. Across the street, a porch light flicked on and a neighbor stepped outside. Then another. Within minutes, shadows began moving across the cul-de-sac. Curtains parted, blinds lifted, and doors swung open. The quiet neighborhood of Willow Creek, usually wrapped in evening stillness, was now stirring like a hive disturbed. Martin's heart raced, but this time not entirely out of fear. He wasn't alone anymore. The sight of familiar faces, Mr. Douglas from next door, the Martinez family 2 houses down, and even elderly Mrs. Nings leaning on her cane, sparked something inside him. A quiet courage began to rise. The imposters had come to his door expecting silence, isolation, and vulnerability. Instead, they now faced an entire community watching their every move. Adam noticed it too, and he used it to his advantage. He raised his voice slightly, making sure every ear could catch his words. "These men claim to be from the HOA," Adam said, his tone deliberate. "But they have no identification, no documentation, nothing official." His eyes locked onto the taller man. "They think they can intimidate my father into submission. But I think we all see the truth, don't we?" The neighbors murmured in agreement, their voices small but growing. The imposters stiffened, shifting uncomfortably as the weight of attention pressed down on them. They had come prepared to scare one man, not to face a dozen watchful eyes. The shorter man barked out suddenly, his voice harsh and defensive. "This doesn't concern anyone else. Go back inside your homes." But the command fell flat. No one moved. If anything, more people stepped closer, forming a loose semicircle around Martin's yard. The flicker of porch lights across the street illuminated the imposters like a stage performance gone wrong. Their illusion of control was crumbling under the glare of community scrutiny. Adam seized the moment. "If you're truly here on official business," he said, voice steady, "then show us your proof. Every neighbor here knows the HOA doesn't operate like this. So where is it? Where's the paperwork?" The taller man's eyes darted around, calculating. His lips pressed into a tight line, but no words came. For the first time, Martin saw genuine hesitation in his face. The bravado was slipping. Mrs. Jennings's frail but firm voice rose from the back of the crowd. "If you men don't leave right now, I'll be the one to call the police myself." The threat of police intervention was like a dagger through the impostors' pretense. Their posture faltered, their confidence drained, and they exchanged a quick, nervous glance. Martin, standing straighter now, felt the tide fully turn. The fear that had once threatened to silence him was gone, replaced by the undeniable truth. Strength wasn't only in defiance, but in numbers. His neighbors had rallied, and together, their collective presence had stripped the impostors of the very power they tried to project. The taller man stepped back slightly, his voice lower now, but still carrying a dangerous edge. "This isn't over," he muttered. Adam didn't blink. "You're right," he said, his voice a calm blade cutting through the night. "It isn't, because next time the police will be waiting." The crowd stirred again, emboldened. The imposters were outnumbered, outmatched, and most importantly, exposed. And as the neighbors closed ranks behind him, Martin realized that what began as a terrifying ordeal was transforming into a defining moment for Willow Creek. The night had awakened the strength of a community. The imposters stood frozen, the weight of the community's eyes pressing down on them like an immovable force. The taller man's shoulders slumped as though gravity had doubled in strength, while the shorter one's fists clenched and unclenched at his sides. The menace in their eyes was still there, but it was dimming, stripped of its earlier sharpness. They had arrived under the cover of dusk, expecting to prey on fear. But now they found themselves exposed under the glow of porch lights, cornered by a united front of neighbors. Adam didn't let the silence linger. He stepped forward, his voice commanding, but even his military bearing unmistakable. "You've come here to intimidate my father," he said, his gaze piercing the imposters. "But this neighborhood isn't yours to control. You've already been found out. Leave now, before this becomes something you can't walk away from." The shorter man's lips curled into a sneer, but even his defiance felt weak now. "You think you're safe just because you've got a crowd?" he muttered. "Crowds scatter. Fear fades, but consequences don't." Adam didn't flinch. Instead, he let the silence hang a beat longer before answering. "You're right about one thing. Consequences don't fade, and when the police show up, yours will follow you long after tonight." Neighbors murmured again, some louder now, voices brimming with confidence. Someone in the back called out, "We've got cameras rolling!" Another added, "And 911 is already dialed. Keep talking if you want them here faster." That was the breaking point. The taller imposter grabbed his partner by the arm, tugging him backwards with urgency. "We're done here," he said firmly, though his voice carried more exhaustion than control. The shorter man resisted for half a second, glaring at Adam and Martin, but the gathering neighbors inching closer left him no choice. With one last venomous glance, he pulled away and stormed down the walkway, his partner close behind. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. Their silence, filled with unshaken resolve, was louder than any celebration. Martin watched them retreat into the shadows, his chest rising and falling with relief he hadn't felt in hours. His legs trembled, but Adam's steady hand on his shoulder grounded him. As the imposters disappeared into the night, Mrs. Jennings stepped forward, her cane tapping firmly against the concrete. "That," she said, her voice strong despite her age, "is what happens when bullies meet a wall they can't break." Laughter rippled softly through the crowd, but it was the kind of laughter that released tension rather than dismissed it. Their neighbors began to talk amongst themselves, offering words of support to Martin and Adam. Mr. Marouglis promised to share his security footage. The Martinez family assured they would file witness statements if needed. One by one, the community expressed solidarity, forming a circle of reassurance around Martin's shaken but steady frame. Later, after the crowd dispersed, Martin and Adam sat quietly on the porch steps. The night air was cooler now, carrying the faint scent of freshly cut grass mixed with the adrenaline that still lingered in Martin's veins. He finally broke the silence. "I don't understand, Adam. Why us?" "Why tonight?" Adam leaned back, his eyes scanning the quiet street as though searching for lingering threats. "Because predators look for weakness," he said simply. "They thought they saw it here. An older man living alone in a quiet neighborhood. Easy target," Martin sighed, his voice heavy with weariness. "And they were wrong." Adam turned to him, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Dead wrong. Because you weren't alone, Dad. You had me. And more than that, you had them." He gestured toward the rows of houses now cloaked in calm once more. "This neighborhood isn't just a place to live. Tonight proved it's a family. And families don't let each other fall." The words sank deep into Martin's heart, chasing away the lingering shadows of fear. For years, he had cherished the peace of Willow Creek, but now she understood something deeper. That peace was only possible when people stood together to defend it. As they rose to go inside, Martin cast one last glance down the street, where the imposters had vanished into the darkness. He knew they might try again, or others like them might come. But this time he would not face it with trembling hands and a sinking heart. He had learned the strength of standing tall, and he had seen the unstoppable power of community. When he finally closed the door behind him, the words echoed in his mind, steady and unyielding, as though etched into the very walls of his home. "Fear may be loud, but courage is steady. And when courage is shared, no shadow can last." The imposters came for one man, but they left defeated by many. Fear knocked at Willow Creek, but it was courage and the power of community that answered.